So today, how do you set about planning and deploying a public Wi-Fi network? That's the multi-million-dollar question. And my guest today, David Witkowski, may just have the answer for us. Join us right after this short break. All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is Claus Hetting, and I'm the host of Wi-Fi Now TV. And this, of course, is the interview program that brings you all the great stories and not least all the great people from across the Wi-Fi industry. So today we'll be discussing how to plan and deploy a public Wi-Fi network with my good friend and Silicon Valley wireless veteran, David Witkowski.
Hi, Claus.
David has authored, hi David. David has authored an outstanding report called the Public Wi-Fi SuperCluster Blueprint. And I have a copy of it actually right here. It's in fact a step-by-step guide, how-to guide for building public Wi-Fi networks with lots of excellent references and a lot of very useful information. So we're going to discuss all of this with David in just a moment. Before that, I just want to make a couple of quick announcements. And first of all, we've got two great new Wi-Fi Now events in the pipeline for this fall. We'll be going to beautiful The Hague in the Netherlands in the end of October this year. And for the first time, we're taking Wi-Fi Now, the conference and expo, to Asia, specifically to Bangkok, end of November. So if you're interested in any of that, in a role in any of that, don't delay. Send me an email at claus@wifinowevents.com, and we can discuss all of that with you. So that's about the events. And for details and registrations, go to wifinowevents.com. And also, while you're there, make sure you check out our new Wi-Fi news section. We're working very hard on getting you all the latest Wi-Fi news and information. So make sure that you subscribe to that. Finally, we also have the Wi-Fi Now Awards coming up this fall with all of 6 categories, including Best Wi-Fi Startup, Service Provider, Best Wi-Fi In-Home Product, lots of other things. So if you want to get recognized for all the great work that you're doing, check it out. It's wifinowevents.com/awards and enter the awards. There's about I think 10 days to go before the deadline, so you still have time to do that. Okay, so those were my announcements for today, and on to you, David Witkowski. Great to see you, and welcome to Wi-Fi Now.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, David, you're I should say, give you the proper title here, the Executive Director, Wireless Communications Initiative at Joint Venture Silicon Valley.
That's right.
And first of all, tell us a little bit about the report that you issued, I think, just recently, maybe a few weeks ago, was it?
I think it was late August. Yeah, so the report was something that we've been working on throughout the course of 2017. We put together a team through the Global Cities Team Challenge organization, which is part of the NIST in National Institutes of Standards and Technology, which is part of the U.S. government. And so NIST made a call for participants. We came in as joint venture to take on a co-chair role in that. And then throughout the course of 2017, we gathered case studies. We did a survey, pulled together a lot of information from cities across the U.S. and, in fact, even some international cities. And then I led a team to create the report and do the authoring and editing on that.
Right, and as we were just talking about before we started the interview here online, it's remarkable that this is actually a cooperation between folks that are involved in this right across the U.S. It's not just a California initiative. And you wanted to highlight also that this is really good. I mean, it's creative, right?
I think it is. I think the U.S. government has done a great job of pulling this group together. They're known for being a little, conservative in their thinking. I don't mean politically conservative, but in terms of not taking risks. And so the NIST Global City Teams Challenge effort was something that came about because of Dr. Sok-Woo Ri, who came into NIST and really brought some industry thinking into the government. And he put together this group and several other superclusters as well. And it's been really gratifying to see people from across the U.S. working together on this project. Mm-hmm. My team consisted of people from Northern California, stretching across the United States all the way into upstate New York. Mm-hmm. So crossing 3 time zones in the entire country, we were able to put together a team that was working together and making this happen.
Yeah, super impressive cooperative piece of work here. And there's a lot of authors, by the way, or contributors, I should say, on the report. It looks like this. And by the way, we're going to put a link in just below this, the posting of this video so that people can download it. So there's a ton of good information in here, David. It is actually hard to generalize from it because it's very specific advice, but let's try to break it down a little bit. So maybe we can start by touching on some good examples of public Wi-Fi projects and what the models for those projects has been.
Sure. So I think public Wi-Fi is one of those things that goes back quite a ways. I mean, we've been talking about public Wi-Fi for over a decade. The examples that seem to work best, and I think the experience has shown that, at least in the United States, the public Wi-Fi networks that are most successful are ones where the city itself is, if you will, an anchor tenant of the system. In other words, the city is deriving value from the network as opposed to just putting in the network for the purposes of, say, tourism or economic development, or just trying to do something that's kind of neat to talk about. In cities where they're using the Wi-Fi network for their own internal operations, then they're also allowing users, visitors and such to have access. That seems to be the model that works best. City of San Jose is one example. When they built their Wi-Fi network, they did several things that were perhaps different. For example, the parking meters in downtown San Jose use the Wi-Fi network as their connectivity. So when you have your app and you're setting up your parking, you're doing it through a Wi-Fi network. Also, normally when you go into like the convention centers in some cities, they're kind of aggressive about charging for the Wi-Fi. San Jose took a different tack. They said, look, we want everyone to have great Wi-Fi throughout the convention center, so they're just going to give it away for free. That was a kind of a radical move on Vijay Sameta's part. He was the former CIO of San Jose. So I think in cases where the cities are willing to kind of break with the traditional thinking and really tune the performance of the network and the operations of the network to match up with the goals, those are examples where the network becomes successful.
Yeah, so multiple uses is really critical for this, right? And as you said, having the city using the infrastructure, the Wi-Fi, for their own uses and being an anchor tenant, in other words, extracting value like that. I mean, I also think this similar case, for example, for Transit Wireless in New York. I don't know to what extent it's public-private, but they also do both. They do public Wi-Fi and they do a service for Transit Wireless people.
And that's really key, because when you think about when you think about the thought process that goes into building a network, a city may say, okay, let's build a Wi-Fi network. Okay, by the time you get through all the procurement and the approvals and the council votes, then by then, the technology is already starting to be kind of down rev. And then, 11AC comes out, wave 2, we get 11AX, and then you go back to the city council and say, hey, we have to upgrade our Wi-Fi network. They say, well, wait a minute, we just built a Wi-Fi network. Why do we have to build another one? So if the city is using it, then I think there's a justification for saying, hey, we need to upgrade this network to keep up with the latest technologies, as opposed to saying, well, we've already dumped a bunch of money into something that we never see any return from. If the city sees return and it can be quantified, then I think they're more willing to allow funding to upgrade the network. And that's really key to keep not only doing the project, but sustaining the project is one of the things that's really important.
So what would you say are the main challenges for a city or a public body who wants to build a public Wi-Fi network? I know it's actually enormously complicated. There's a lot of different aspects to this, but maybe we can have a look at maybe first some of the funding aspects and then possibly some of the technical aspects.
Sure. So I think that the three things that really are problematic in getting through the process of deciding to do a Wi-Fi network, certainly funding is the issue. Cities don't have large slush funds of money to invest in projects. Cities have limited budgets. For every dollar a city spends on something, they can't spend that dollar on something else. So they have to be very careful about where they invest their money. The second is that the performance or the way that they handle authentication, I think, can really make the difference. And so I think that cities have to really put some thinking into the question of, how do you want to onboard people? If you're going to have a really painful login process, obviously that's going to be problematic. People don't want intense captive portals that are going to prevent them from getting access. And so the other is that I think cities are concerned about, the future upgradability of the network. And okay, we've spent the money. Now where are we going to spend the money again? And there are some other issues that I think are somewhat secondary, but for example, security, people using the network for illegal activities or downloading pornography and things like that. Those can be solved with technology, but they are sort of at a first blush. Cities might go, well, wait a minute, what if somebody uses this network to download pornography, and then we're liable? So how do we get through that thought process? That's another issue.
So maybe let's dive a little bit into, one of the things that I've observed, of course, is that 10 years ago, there was a surge in interest in municipal Wi-Fi, right? And some of those networks still exist, and some of them, for example, the Google Mountain View network has actually been switched off now, as far as I understand. So it's been sort of a mixed bag of, some modest successes and a lot of stuff that's kind of been allowed to just gradually go away, I guess. In the 10 years, a lot has happened, right? Also technically, I mean, would you support that statement that the technology has ripened to the extent that we can now revisit municipal Wi-Fi with more successfully now?
I think it can. I think that we still need a few things in the 802.11 standard to really make this work. But I think we're getting there. And I think my conversations with people in the leadership team for 802.11 are that they are aware of these problems, and hopefully we'll be able to get through standards process to deal with it. Things like handoff and such like that. I mean, it's that kind of stuff needs to be dealt with. Technology has evolved in terms of authentication. We can now do onboarding and share credentials across networks. So for example, if you were to authenticate in a city and then go to a different city, ideally you could just use their network, right? You shouldn't have to re-authenticate. If I live in San Jose and I authenticate on the San Jose network, I shouldn't have to re-authenticate in any other Bay Area networks. They should just all recognize me. We can get there, but I think it's going to take a little bit of cooperation.
Right, so a lot of this technology, specifically authentication, for example, but also, the roaming functionality between access points and so on. I mean, the authentication piece, as I understand it, is already there. I mean, the technology exists, right?
It just has to be implemented, right?
But right, exactly. So there's a gap between this technology. A lot of it is quite new, right? And what people actually understand, in the field to be available. And that's also a challenge, right? You have to educate people, essentially.
Well, and how to educate people, how to educate users. I mean, there's access and adoption. Those are two things, right? You can have a network, but if it's hard for people to get onto, or the instructions are all in English and your primary residents in that area are Spanish speaking, then you have a problem. You have to be able to not only create a network, but you have to be able to teach people how to use it. But then I also think that cities have a challenge in that many cities don't typically employ telecommunications engineers, and so how does a city build a network in a way that makes sense to take advantage of those modern technologies is a challenge. And I think that's where those public-private partnerships come into play. working with companies who understand the technology, they can help guide them through that thinking process.
Right. So here's something that I've heard from a number of different people involved in city Wi-Fi projects. And one of the comments, I actually forget who told me this. One of the comments that I heard was that unless a city has an exact plan as to what they intended to use their Wi-Fi network for, and a plan in place to promote it and use it for whatever purpose, be it tourism or marketing their services, public services, whatever it is, those types of city Wi-Fi networks that don't have that typically fail because people have no reason to go on them for any, and they're not promoted well enough. I mean, in your report, did you find that also?
Yeah, the report does talk about that. For example, the city of San Leandro, California, talked very specifically about not only building out the network, but also communicating the existence of the network. Obviously, a Wi-Fi network is invisible. Unless you think to go looking for it, people won't know that it's there. So you can have signage, you can have ads in newspapers, you can have political leaders or community leaders tweeting or Facebooking about, promoting, say, hey, we got this new Wi-Fi network, I'm super excited about it. And then you can even have classes or, you can meet at the library or something like that and give people a chance to sort of learn about it. If you have people that are less technically literate, it might be a good idea to give them an opportunity to. So I think that adoption piece is really key, and that's something that we did touch on in the report.
Yeah, it's super important, and it's good that that's in there as well. And by the way, I was impressed by the report because you systematically go through and the issues, and have actually turned the report into a manual nearly on how to approach a public Wi-Fi build. So it's very, very useful. So let me talk to you about.
I have to give credit to my team on that.
Right.
It wasn't just me. Certainly, I had a great team, and there was a ton of people with a lot of deep knowledge, and pulling them together into one group and getting this out. So for everybody who was involved in the report, kudos.
Yeah, definitely, David. I mean, it's clear, and here it is. By the way, the report, the front page. There's a ton of contributors from all over the United States, and that have helped you write this report. And we just wanted to get that totally in place, so we give credit where credit is due here. That's good. So let me touch on another subject, and a subject that is really hot right now on this side of the Atlantic, and that's what's called Wi-Fi for EU. It is a 120 million euro, about 150 million euros $150 million that the European Union has decided to give away for free Wi-Fi projects for cities and municipal bodies and so forth across Europe. And we haven't really started it yet. It has been approved. There's a lot of money in play here. And there's it's going to start probably beginning of next year, late this year perhaps. So what would you advise cities in Europe to do? How should they approach this? And I should say they're not given a lot of money per city to do this. We're talking about $25,000 per city for Wi-Fi infrastructure.
Right. Well, it's a great start. So I hope that this will be the beginning of something that would be significant. And I would love to see the case studies, by the way. I'm looking forward to looking at this a few years down the road and kind of looking back and learning from what you're doing, because there's going to be a lot of good learning in this. My advice would be, I think the EU really ought to look at this as an opportunity to prove out the value of linking networks together. So I touched on that a little bit earlier, is that, it doesn't make any sense to me to have a captive portal for one city and then a captive portal for another city. The technology exists to allow those systems to link together. If you authenticate on, I'm going to be in Switzerland in late October. If I authenticate on a network in Zurich and then I'm in Bern, I shouldn't have to re-authenticate on the Bern network. I mean, I would recommend that you make this an EU-wide authentication mechanism. The other advice that I would give is that if you look at 802.11 as it's been developed, it's really an industry standard, and the careabouts of users sort of percolate up into the standard through the industry. I think there's a lot of value in having cities communicate directly into 802.11 with their careabouts. I mean, and certainly after they go through this exercise, there's going to be a lot of feedback. And cities, may not want to get involved in standards process directly. Neither would a city potentially like to hire a consultant. They may not have the money for that. But imagine that, say, 20 cities got together and said, okay, we're all going to jointly fund a consultant. Each of us is going to pay for 2 hours of his time a week. That's a full-time consultant that 20 cities can then use. And that person can then go into the 802.11 meetings and say, look, here's what the EU cities need to make this successful. This is great, but we need this to really make it work. And I think there's a place at the table in the 802.11 standard for those bigger users. And I would really like to see that. I would really like to see the city governments involved in driving the standard forward, because then things like authentication and handoff will get a lot more attention. And we really need that, I think, to make Wi-Fi very robust.
That's a super good point. I mean, I'm not very familiar with the IEEE groups here, but I don't think we've seen that before, right? That would be a completely new thing.
Really haven't. I mean, a lot of the people who are involved in that standards group are typically industry. So I think there's an opportunity for a city's consortium to get involved and then go into 802.11. And I would love to see that. I myself am driving two things here locally, which is one, I'm encouraging the San Francisco Bay Area cities to link their Wi-Fi networks together. So that we can have that regional value. There's a rule that, it's sort of the old idea that like the first fax machine was very expensive and completely worthless because it couldn't connect to anything. It was the second fax machine that made the first fax machine valuable, right? Yeah. So this notion that the more nodes there are in a network, the more valuable the network is, and the costs actually go down because you're now driving the value up as the price of the device goes down. So likewise, if we link our Wi-Fi networks together, then I think that we can create a more valuable network.
Should be coast-to-coast city Wi-Fi in the United States.
Would love to see that. That'd be fantastic.
Wouldn't that be fantastic?
That'd be great. I'd like to have, just even major cities agree, like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose.
And you've got a whole bunch of folks already in your network that are working on this, right? So
and so then the other thing is to build that coalition so that we can go into the 802.11 and say, hey, here's what we need. We know from experience that this is what we need to make this network successful. Yeah. Please add that to the standard. Yeah. And for example, I think there's other opportunities. You think about handsets, right? I mean, how many handsets really have Hotspot 2.0? Very few. Why? Well, and I think that the phone vendors don't necessarily see the value. But if a lot of cities were to stand up and say, look, we really need Hotspot 2.0, can you please make a commitment to put that in your phone, starting with every phone you sell 2 years from now? Then make that an expectation. But the cities as a group have a large voice.
That's right, but they're not leveraging that. They're not really leveraging that yet. I mean, but they could though, right?
They could, and then I would love to see, with your project, with the EU project, that would be great to see that happen. That they could all have a voice and say, here's what we. Maybe what you need to do is sort of put together a 6-month, 1-year feedback system where you go in and say, okay, 6 months in, here's where we are. Yeah. What would you have liked to, what were the challenges that you faced, and how could those challenges have been resolved by standards changes, and then go back to 802.11 and say, here's what we think.
Right. I'm all over the Wi-Fi for EU project, and we try to help them as much as we can. It's going to be a very steep learning curve for a lot of these cities out there. So, the educational aspect is important. We're trying to unite the industry around it.
Well, you're the right guy to educate them.
Well, I hope so. But I'm still just one person, so hopefully maybe we'll get some more of the industry together. Yeah. David, it's really good to have you. And the last question, maybe just very quickly. So what's the next step for this type of work, are you guys going to keep working on this and working together on this?
So yeah, so we want to continue the momentum into 2018. We've had conversations with NIST about what this looks like next year. A lot of feedback has gone into it. One of the things that it looks like we're probably going to do is get involved in rural broadband. So there are still, even within 25 miles of San Jose, California, there are still areas that are unconnected. There are places up in the mountains, that don't have broadband. The reality is that, and it's kind of a dirty little secret, but there are places in San Jose itself that don't have broadband. So we have to fix that. And so I think one of the ideas is to avoid fiber, to use, I say, like point-to-point linking, whether that's sub 6 gigahertz or 60 gigahertz bands, and figure out a way to link these systems together and extend the broadband that we have into these communities. So it looks like NIST wants to pursue that. They've asked our team to reform around that mission. I think we're still in discussions about how this plays out, but come January next year, I think we're going to have a direction for this group. And I expect that the majority of the people that were involved will continue. We'll probably add some to the team. And as to whether I continue as a co-chair, that's something that we're going to have to decide. But I believe that we do have a desire to keep going, and we've built a great team. So there's no reason why we shouldn't keep going.
And a lot of people would never believe you when you said in the state of California, you have these places where there's no broadband. But of course, it's also a big state, right, with a lot of mountain areas and so forth.
And it's a big city, right? San Jose is a city of over 1 million people. It's a very large city, and there are wealthy areas and there are very poor areas, and unfortunately we haven't seen the build out of broadband into those those poor areas, and I think we need to fix that. It's a tragedy to call ourselves the capital of Silicon Valley, and we have 33,000 people that don't have broadband.
Yeah.
So we're going to
David, you're doing fantastic work, and I congratulate you on all of that, and of course the report and everything. And I thank you for coming on the show, and please come back and see us again and share some more insights. All right?
Always good to see you, Claus.
Great. Thanks. You
Bye.
too. Bye. All right, everybody, that's it for this week's show. Thanks to David Witkowski from Joint Venture Silicon Valley for joining us. And don't forget to download a copy of David's report, where we are going to put the link that you can use for that in the notes to this program, and make sure you use it. So that's it for now. Join me for the next show, the next Wi-Fi Now episode. It's going to be on very soon. Thanks very much. Bye.
Wi-Fi Now is a production of RCR TV News. To suggest a show topic or to learn more about Wi-Fi Now events, you can reach Claus Hetting at klaus@hettingconsulting.com. To find out more about Wi-Fi Now and all things wireless, visit rcrwireless.com.